11 days ago, one company froze $131 million that belonged to a foreign country's central bank. Not a hacker, not a court fight that dragged on for a year. One company, one afternoon, acting on the order of a U.S. agency most Americans couldn't name if you asked them. And in that same stretch of 11 days, almost nobody connected it to the biggest crypto story of the summer. The week Congress supposedly took the government's hands off your money for good. Here's the part almost nobody put together. That freeze and that ban trace back to two different laws that were built to look like opposites and actually do the exact same job. Let me show you, because the headline you got and the mechanism underneath it are not the same story. Start with what actually happened this month. Congress banned the Federal Reserve from ever building a digital dollar, a CBDC. For 4 years, no committee, no chairman, no digital account that answers straight to a central bank. If you follow this stuff even a little, you probably heard some version of, they finally banned the CBDC, and you probably felt a flicker of relief. Here's what you probably didn't hear. In that same handful of weeks, Russia's parliament passed a law recognizing Bitcoin as legal property. The US Senate, meanwhile, couldn't find 60 votes for its own basic crypto rulebook, a bill called the Clarity Act that's been sitting there since spring. One government moving on this, one completely stuck. And smack in the middle of that gridlock, a law almost nobody voted on, and almost nobody is talking about, quietly did something much bigger than either headline. And underneath both of those headlines, sitting there the entire time, is the one asset none of this legislation actually touches, either way. Bitcoin isn't part of the fight over who controls the stablecoin freeze switch. It's the reason that fight exists at all, and by the end of tonight, you'll see exactly why. By the time we get to the end of this, you're going to know exactly who ended up holding the power everyone thinks they just took away. And it changes how you should watch Wednesday's Fed meeting completely, because the same government making that decision already made a much bigger one this month, and it made it without a single camera in the room. Let's start with the ban, because the ban is real. It's also not what you think it is. Here's what happened in plain terms. There's a bill called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It's about housing, mortgages, permitting, the kind of bill that puts most people to sleep. Buried inside it is a single provision. The Federal Reserve cannot issue a central bank digital currency. Not shouldn't, cannot. It passed the House 358 to 32. It passed the Senate 85 to 5. Numbers like that almost never happen in Washington anymore, on anything. And then it did something even stranger. The president never signed it. He never vetoed it either. Under the Constitution, a bill that just sits on a president's desk for 10 days while Congress is in session becomes law anyway, with nobody's signature on it. That's exactly what happened here. Nobody stood at a podium. Nobody held a bill signing ceremony. The most significant financial law of the summer became real the way a parking ticket becomes final if you never contest it. Think about that for a second. This is a president who talks about crypto constantly, who has taken credit for basically every friendly thing that's happened to this industry in the last year. And on the one bill that's a genuine, unambiguous win for the keep the government out of my digital money crowd, he didn't even show up to take the credit. That should make you curious. It made me curious. And here's the first thing that curiosity turns up. This isn't a permanent ban. It's a countdown clock. The prohibition runs out on December 31st, 2030. After that date, it doesn't renew itself. It doesn't convert into something permanent. It just expires, like a coupon, unless Congress goes back in and does the whole fight over again before the deadline. And the only reason this thing got 85 votes in the first place is that it hitched a ride inside a popular housing bill. Strip away that cover, and you're asking the same divided Congress that can't pass its own crypto rulebook to reassemble that exact same coalition from scratch sometime before 2030. Good luck. So here's the honest read on They banned the CBDC. They didn't ban it, they postponed it quietly for 4 years inside a bill about something else, and left the real fight for a Congress 5 years from now to have all over again. That's a strange kind of victory to take a victory lap on, and I think that's exactly why nobody did. But even that isn't the real story. Because here's the question that actually matters, and it's the one that led me straight to that $131 million freeze I opened with. If they really wanted the government out of your digital money, banning one specific tool the Fed hadn't even built yet is a strange way to do it. So I went looking for what they built instead. And it turns out they didn't need a CBDC at all. They already had something better. And it's already been used twice in the last 3 weeks. Before I show you what that is, quick heads up. There's a free tool I built that tracks exactly this kind of thing in real time. The signals that tell you which way control over your money is actually moving. I'll show you where to find it once you see why you'd want it. Here's the thing almost nobody puts next to the CBDC story, even though it happened at basically the same time. A completely different law, called the Genius Act, spent the last year quietly getting implemented. It's the law that legalized stablecoins, the USDT and USDC tokens that are just dollars living on a blockchain. Sounds boring. Sounds like plumbing. Here's the sentence buried inside it that isn't boring at all. To legally operate as a stablecoin issuer in the United States, a company is required by law to have the technical capability to freeze, seize, or block any transaction the moment it receives what the law calls a lawful order. Not may cooperate if asked nicely, required. It's a condition of being allowed to exist. No freeze switch, no license. Sit with that, because this is the part that should stop you. We didn't ban programmable, freezable digital money. We just required every private company that wants to issue it to build the exact same capability a CBDC would have needed in the first place. Same function, different letterhead. And Bitcoin, notice, isn't built this way at all. Nobody had to write that clause into Bitcoin's code because there's no company on the other end of it to write the clause into. And this isn't theoretical. This is already happening at scale right now to real money. 11 days before I'm recording this, on July 16th, the Treasury sanctioned 4 wallets tied to Iran's central bank. Within hours, Tether froze $131 million sitting in those wallets. 2 weeks before that, in a coordinated action against ISIS-K financing, the same company froze funds across 134 separate wallets. And if you think those are rare, one-off headlines, they're not. In one rolling 30-day stretch earlier this year, that same company blacklisted 370 addresses and froze more than $514 million. That's not a scandal. That's a normal month for the system we just built. Here's the picture forming. A private company, acting on a government order, can freeze a 9-figure sum in an afternoon on money that millions of ordinary people use every single day to move dollars around the world. That is not a hypothetical fear about some future CBDC. That is the current, operating, legally mandated design of the digital dollar system we already have, right now, without a Fed account in sight. The CBDC ban didn't close that door. It just made sure the door had a different name on it. Try writing that same sentence about Bitcoin. A private company froze $131 million of Bitcoin on government order. You can't write it because there's no company holding the ledger. That's not a slogan, and it's not an accident. It's the actual structural difference between a network with somebody's name on the incorporation papers and a network with nobody's name on anything. Think of it like this. Imagine you're terrified of your landlord getting a master key to your apartment. So you pass a law saying the landlord, specifically, is banned from having one. Feels like a win. Except the same law also says every locksmith in the building has to hand a copy of every key they cut over to the property management company, by law, or they're not allowed to cut keys at all. You didn't stop anyone from being able to walk into your apartment. You just made sure it wasn't the landlord doing it. Bitcoin is the one apartment in this whole building where there's no locksmith to hand a key to in the first place. Hold on to that. We're coming back to it. So if it's not the Fed sitting on that master key, who is? That's the question that actually matters here, and the answer is where this gets uncomfortable. The rules I just walked you through, the ones requiring stablecoin issuers to freeze money on command, aren't written or enforced by the Federal Reserve. They come from two other agencies, FinCEN and OFAC, and both of them live inside the Treasury Department. The Federal Reserve has no role in any of it. None. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Here's why. The Federal Reserve was built on purpose back in 1913 to sit at arm's length from whoever happens to be in the White House. Not fully independent, nobody's pretending that, but insulated. Governors serve staggered 14-year terms, specifically so no single president can reshape the whole board in one term. A chair can't just be fired on a whim. That design has been under real, live pressure this year. This past June, the Supreme Court handed down two rulings on the same day. One of them, a case called Trump versus Slaughter, said presidents can now remove the heads of independent agencies whenever they want. The other, a case called Trump versus Cook, carved out a single, specific exception: the Federal Reserve. The justices wrote that not only the fact of independence, but also the appearance of independence is key to the Federal Reserve's design. Out of every agency in the entire federal government, the court went out of its way to protect exactly one, by name, because the alternative, a Fed that answers to one man, was too dangerous even to leave on the table. That's not a small thing. That's the nation's highest court spending real institutional capital this year, making sure your money supply doesn't answer to a single elected official. Now hold that up against what we just walked through. The power to freeze your digital dollars on command doesn't sit with the institution the Supreme Court just went out of its way to insulate. It sits with the Treasury Department, run by one cabinet secretary who serves at the pleasure of whoever's sitting in the Oval Office and can be replaced in an afternoon. Congress and the courts spent 2026 building a wall around the Fed, and in the exact same year, they routed the actual switch that can freeze your money straight past that wall into the one office that never got one. I want to be careful here because I'm not telling you this was some grand coordinated plan. I don't have a memo proving anybody sat in a room and designed it this way on purpose. What I can show you is the structure, and the structure speaks for itself. Whether or not anyone meant to build it this way, this is what got built. The insulated institution lost the one power that would have made a CBDC frightening, and the political one gained it instead. I know how that sounds coming from a finance channel, so let me back it up with something other than my own read on it. There's actual data on how much this fragility is already being priced by real money. A Bitcoin Policy Institute study from earlier this year tracked something specific: the odds, on real prediction markets, that Fed Chair Jerome Powell would be fired against Bitcoin's price hour by hour. When those firing odds spiked, Bitcoin's price moved, and it kept moving for about 14 hours afterward. Here's the detail that should stick with you. When the threat faded and the odds came back down, Bitcoin's price didn't fully come back down with it. Confidence in this system erodes fast. It rebuilds slow. That's not a Bitcoiner's opinion. That's measured in real prices by real traders this year. Even the man running the Fed right now seems to know exactly how thin the ice is. Kevin Warsh, testifying to the Senate in July, said, and I'm quoting him directly, "They chose an independent guy to do an independent job, and that's exactly what I plan on doing." He's also assembled 5 outside task forces this summer just to shore up the Fed's credibility on communication, data, and inflation policy, bringing in outside names like Mervyn King and Raghuram Rajan. Jerome Powell, whose term as chair technically ended in May, chose to stay on the board anyway, specifically citing what he called unprecedented legal attacks against the institution, and said he has no intention of leaving until, in his words, The investigation is well and truly over. These are not the words of men who think the fight over who controls this system is finished. These are the words of men in the middle of it, trying to hold the line. And Bitcoin sits completely outside that entire fight. Nobody has to testify to defend its independence. Nobody assembles a task force to shore up trust in 21 million. Nobody needs a Supreme Court ruling to protect Bitcoin from a president because there's no chair, no board, and no building to apply pressure to. The trust isn't institutional. It isn't political. It's the math. And the math doesn't take sides. This is exactly the kind of thing I track for myself. Because headlines about independence and insulation don't mean much if you can't see the actual signals moving underneath them. I built a free page called the Macro Command Center at timtalksfinance.com/command-center. It puts the real numbers on one screen: the debt, what's actually happening to the dollar, and yes, Bitcoin. Side by side, updated, not spun. It's free, no card required. Links in the description if you want to see it after this. So here's where we are. The thing everyone was scared of with a CBDC, unmediated government control over your digital money, didn't get banned. It got relocated to the part of government with the least insulation from politics, and it's already live. And it's already been used on real money twice in the last 3 weeks alone. And it's about to get a lot bigger than stablecoins. Because stablecoins are just the opening move. The bigger plan, and it's not a secret, it's being announced in actual press releases, is to do the same thing to everything else you own. Just 2 weeks ago, the UK government assembled a tokenization task force with basically every major bank on earth sitting at the table. BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, HSBC, UBS, over 50 firms total. Their job is to turn ordinary financial assets, bonds first, then stocks, then eventually things like real estate, into digital tokens that live on a blockchain. Around the same time, the company that already custodies more than $100 trillion of America's stocks and bonds, the DTCC, started quietly piloting its own version of the same thing, with a full launch targeted for this fall. That's not a startup with a white paper. That's the actual plumbing of Wall Street lining up to rebuild itself as tokens. Add it up across the industry right now, and there's already tens of billions of dollars of real assets tokenized this way today, growing every single month. And that's before any of these bigger pilots even finish. Every one of those tokens, every dollar of it, has an issuer. Bitcoin is the only line item in that entire ledger that doesn't. Here's why that matters to you, and it's the same question you should ask about literally anything digital that touches your money. Who issues the token, and who can freeze it? Because a token isn't magic. It's a receipt. Somebody writes the code, somebody runs the system. And that somebody can always, always build in a switch. We just spent this entire video watching that exact switch get built into stablecoins by law as a condition of being allowed to operate. There is no reason to believe the tokenized bond, the tokenized stock, the tokenized slice of your own house down the road gets built any differently. If anything, after watching how carefully they wrote the stablecoin rules, you should expect the switch to be even more explicit next time, not less. Think of it like a photocopier that also happens to keep a permanent log of who's allowed to touch each copy and can void any copy it doesn't like at any time from a control room you'll never see. That's not a criticism of the technology itself. Tokenization genuinely can make markets faster and cheaper. It's a description of who's actually in charge of it. And the answer, every single time, in every single case we've looked at today, is someone. A committee, a department, a company complying with a lawful order, an issuer. Every asset in this entire system, your bank account, your bonds, your stablecoins, And soon enough, your tokenized everything else has one thing in common. Somewhere at the top of it, there's a person, or an office, or a company that can say no to you, freeze it, rewrite the rules on it, answer a lawful order you'll never even see about money you thought was yours. Bitcoin doesn't have a top. There's no office to write the rulebook, no company to hand the master key to, no chairman to testify about how independent he still is. Just 21 million, and the protocol that enforces it. There is exactly one digital asset on Earth with no issuer at all. Not a company that could theoretically be asked to add a freeze function. Not a committee that could theoretically get pressured. No one. Bitcoin. 21 million. That's the entire supply. Forever. Not 21 million and one. It isn't a number a Treasury Secretary sets, or a number a Fed chair defends in a Senate hearing, or a number that lives in a bill that sunsets on a specific date 5 years from now. It's written into the protocol, enforced by tens of thousands of computers scattered across the planet that would all have to agree together to break their own rules to change it. Their entire reason for existing is to never do that. Walk back through everything we just covered one more time and watch Bitcoin answer every single piece of it. The stablecoin had an issuer, required by law to freeze it on command. Bitcoin has no issuer, and there's no company to receive the order in the first place. The CBDC ban had a sunset date, expiring on a calendar somebody else controls. Bitcoin doesn't sunset, it doesn't renew. There's no clock and no committee that votes on whether it keeps existing. The Fed has staggered board terms and a Supreme Court exception protecting its independence. And even that wasn't enough to keep the freeze power away from a more political department entirely. Bitcoin doesn't need protecting from politics because there's no office for politics to walk into. That's the actual meaning of no issuer. It's not a slogan, it's the honest answer to the only question that's mattered this entire video. Who can say no to you? With Bitcoin, held properly, in your own custody, with your own keys, not sitting as a balance on someone else's app, the answer is nobody. There's no lawful order to serve because there's no landlord holding a master key. Just a protocol that treats a Treasury Secretary and a retired school teacher in Ohio exactly the same. Now, I want to be straight with you, the way I try to be every time we get here. I'm not telling you Bitcoin is about to hit some number by a certain date. I don't do price targets, and I don't trust anyone who hands you one with a straight face. There are no certainties in any of this, only probabilities. Bitcoin is volatile. It's fallen by half before, more than once, and it will again. None of that is the argument I'm making tonight. The argument is the direction. Every year this pattern plays out, and it has, over and over, all through this year, the same shape repeats. A government under financial pressure keeps finding ways to keep a hand on the money, whether that hand wears a Federal Reserve badge or a Treasury one this time. The probability that this pattern keeps repeating doesn't go down from here. It goes up. That's not a prophecy. That's just paying attention to which way the arithmetic is already pointing. The same way we paid attention to it with the freeze receipts, the sunset clause, and the Supreme Court ruling. All real, all checkable, none of it guesswork. You don't need me to tell you what to do with that. I'm going to hand you the math and the pattern, and you get to decide, on your own time, how much of what you've built you want sitting somewhere nobody can freeze it. Which brings us to Wednesday. Because this Wednesday, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the same government we just spent this whole video watching move the freeze power around, without a single vote, without a signature, without a press conference, sits down to decide something else entirely. What your dollar is actually worth. A handful of people in a room deciding the value of money for everyone who uses it. The same week we found out exactly how casually the rest of the control over that money can get reassigned. I'm not going to sit here and guess whether they cut or hike. That's a different conversation. And honestly, it's the less important question. Watch it happen, but watch it with this in your head. The meeting on Wednesday and the freeze switch we just walked through aren't two separate stories. They're the same room, two doors. One door is what your dollar is worth. The other is who gets to decide whether you're allowed to move it at all. Bitcoin doesn't sit behind either door, and that's not a coincidence. It's the entire reason it's worth understanding before Wednesday, not after. This week, you got to see behind both doors in the same 7 days, which almost never happens. So here's what I'd actually watch for. Not a prediction, just what to pay attention to. First, whether Congress makes any real move toward a permanent CBDC ban before that 2030 deadline creeps up, or whether it just sits there quietly the way most sunset clauses do. Second, whether the next stablecoin freeze, and there will be a next one, involves an amount or a target that makes people outside the crypto world actually start paying attention. Third, whether the Clarity Act ever gets its 60 votes, or whether Washington keeps stalling on the one bill that would actually put guardrails on all of this, while the freeze switch keeps getting used in the meantime, guardrails or not. Three checkable things. None of them require me to guess the future for you, and none of them require Bitcoin to do anything at all to matter. This story plays out whether Bitcoin's price moves a single dollar or not. Before you go, if any of this landed, don't just let it scroll past. I put together that free macro command center I mentioned at timtalksfinance.com/command-center, so you can watch these signals yourself instead of waiting for someone to explain them to you after the fact. It takes about 2 minutes to set up, and it's the same page I check every morning before I say a word on camera. They didn't take the government's hand off your money, they just moved which hand it is. 21 million doesn't care whose hand is reaching, because with Bitcoin, there's nothing to reach for. That's the whole argument, and it was true before this video, and it'll still be true after the next law changes something else. Probability, not prophecy, and the door's still open. What you do with that is yours to decide.